Hello, I'm Jack Fink, and welcome to Eye on Politics on CBS News Texas. It's a somber milestone as Russia's war against Ukraine hits the one-year mark. This week, President Joe Biden made an unannounced trip to Kyiv to meet with that country's President Volodymyr Zelensky to pledge the United States continued support. Two members of Congress from North Texas visited with Ukraine's president this week as well. We spoke with Republican Congressman Keith Self about the meeting.
And we got a great conversation with him about his priorities going forward.
North Texas Congressman Keith Self shared with me this photo of him meeting Ukraine's president, Volodymyr Zelensky. The meeting in Kyiv Tuesday was part of a delegation that included North Texas Congressman Jake Ellzey and another Texan, Michael McCaul, who chairs the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman Self spoke with me from Poland and said he's growing more concerned now that China is considering providing weapons and ammunition to help Russia in its war against Ukraine.
We do not want this to go into NATO or between the U.S. and China. That must not happen. We must not have nuclear weapons involved. If we can keep this confined to the current battlefield, I would be all in for that, because we cannot let this get to escalate further.
Self said Russian President Vladimir Putin attacked Ukraine 1 year ago this week because he didn't suffer any consequences after he invaded the nation of Georgia in 2008 and seized Crimea from Ukraine in 2014.
Frankly, this is happening because Putin feels emboldened. To allow him to take even part of a sovereign nation, as he has done before, would further embolden him.
He said the House Foreign Affairs Committee is discussing what it can do going forward to make Russia's war against Ukraine as short as possible. Self also disagreed with some Republicans and others who say the U.S. should focus on securing its own southern border. He said Americans should be doing both.
I'm not for giving any blank check to anybody, but I am for giving the Ukraine what they need to defend their homeland, because that's what I'm asking the administration to do on the southern border. And that's what we, as the leader of the West, the leader of the Western alliance, must do in Ukraine, or we're going to have Putin on the loose.
The president and members of Congress traveled to Poland. Three, two, one. The president and members of Congress traveled from Poland to Ukraine and back aboard a train because a plane would have been too risky. Congressman Ellzey was traveling earlier this week and was unavailable for an interview. In Dallas Wednesday, Senator John Cornyn said he supports the U.S.'s continued military aid to Ukraine to defeat Putin.
He will not stop with Ukraine, and it's important that he be stopped, and thank goodness for the leadership of President Zelensky and the bravery of the Ukrainian people. They seem to be doing a good job, and they deserve our continued support.
Now more of our conversation with Congressman Self, who was in Poland.
I'm here with the delegation from the House Foreign Affairs Committee. So we met with President Zelensky as a committee, as a delegation, which included even a judiciary member. But what we discussed was his priorities going forward, because as you know, the Russian offensive is either started now or will start soon, according to the analysis.
And so your visit with him comes just after President Biden's unannounced trip there. What did you make of the president's trip, and how long was your trip planned for?
Well, our trip had been planned since the delegation trip was planned for weeks. Really, they didn't interfere with each other. They did not conflict. We were held up for a little bit because obviously his large support entourage makes things slower. But no, we were right on time. We got in a little bit late into Kyiv, but our meeting with the president went as scheduled. And we got a great conversation with him about his priorities going forward and the immediate need that he sees with the Russian offensive.
And do you support him and his efforts? And what did you make of Zelensky, the man?
He certainly has a vision, and he's very articulate with his vision. What I make of the situation is, I think it's increasingly clear that the proxy war is actually between the West, led by the US, and China. We know that China supports Russia now. Of course, Russia and Ukraine are the belligerents on the battlefield, but you've recently seen several moves from China. We know that they are supporting with non-lethal aid now. There was talk of them starting to provide lethal aid, which the US administration addressed. And then recently we see that Xi is going to visit Russia. So this is a fast moving, unfolding situation, Jack, that we see. And I don't know how it's going to go going forward, but stay tuned, because there are a lot of very high level political moves being made.
How concerned are you? It sounds like your level of concern has kicked up a notch.
I am, because we do not want this to go into NATO or between the US and China. That must not happen. We must not have nuclear weapons involved. If we can keep this confined to the current battlefield, I would be all in for that, because we cannot let this get to escalate further. I frankly don't think Putin is going to use nuclear weapons. I don't think that's in the cards. He'll bluff, he'll threaten, but I don't think he'll do that. But we have a serious situation here unfolding that we need to manage correctly.
And so in your mind, what is the best way to do that? Is that to continue to send military aid to Ukraine and other aid to Ukraine?
Well, this has been unfolding for several years. We did nothing when he invaded Georgia. We did nothing when he invaded Crimea. We had the disastrous debacle, the withdrawal from Afghanistan. So this has been unfolding. Frankly, this is happening because Putin feels emboldened. To allow him to take even part of a sovereign nation, as he has done before, would further embolden him. So I really do not agree with the statement that as long as it takes, because as long as it takes indicates that it's going to be a long war. And I don't think that that's to the benefit of the defense of Ukraine. So we're talking about what, as a Foreign Affairs Committee, we need to be doing to make this the shortest war we can.
And so how do you do that? By continuing to give them aid and weapons, et cetera?
Well, I'm not going to talk about the humanitarian aid. Frankly, the dollars that we are giving the Ukrainian government, I think that's up to the State Department. I will talk about the weapons, and I was amazed at the Munich Security Conference at the military emphasis across the NATO nations to continue to support Ukraine, because frankly, the eastern flank of NATO, from the Baltics through Poland, understand that Putin must be stopped because they're next. The political scene is a little bit concerning, because I think there's a little bit of light between the politicos in the Western NATO nations as compared to the Eastern NATO nations who are on the front lines. But I think, generally speaking, militarily, the nations are aligned.
I just have a couple more questions. I know your time is brief, and I appreciate it. I did want to ask you, there are some in the Republican Party who say, hey, wait a minute, and not just Republicans, but I've seen the Republicans say, some of them say, you know, there shouldn't be an endless check, a blank check for Ukraine. And I'm wondering, you know, they say, well, what about our border, the southern border here? And so I'm wondering, in your mind, is this a case where both should be done as opposed to one or the other?
Absolutely. We can do both. All it takes is the administration to enforce the laws of the nation on the southern border. We don't need to give him more laws or more authority, just enforce the laws on the southern border. It is one of my talking points that I've been saying for months. I want a quid pro quo on the southern border. I want enforcement on the southern border. I want to secure our border as we should be doing. Texas, as you know, is on the front lines of that. And absolutely, I have been discussing this for days, that a quid pro quo on the southern border is absolutely necessary. I've been to the border twice. I've seen both sides of it, and it's got to be done. Now, the blank check that you mentioned, I'm not for giving any blank check to anybody, but I am for giving the Ukraine what they need to defend their homeland, because that's what I'm asking the administration to do on the southern border. And that's what we, as the leader of the West, the leader of the Western alliance, must do in Ukraine, or we're going to have Putin on the loose.
And that could mean, in your mind, U.S. troops defending NATO countries if he's allowed to go through Ukraine.
I don't think it means Article 5, which is what you're discussing, NATO Article, excuse me, Article 5 in the NATO Charter, that attack on one is attack on all of them, and we would defend NATO nations. I don't think Putin wants that. But there are other nations that are not NATO members that might be taken as he tries to expand the old Soviet empire.
And my last question is, if you can say, for security purposes, where are you today and who else are you meeting with on your trip?
I cannot tell you where I am, but I will tell you that I've just met with some Texas soldiers, and we had a great chat, but I cannot tell you exactly where I am.
And my last question to you is, I believe you are out of Ukraine, though, correct?
I am out of Ukraine. That is correct.
And so you had to take the train out as opposed to flying out, all right?
Took the train in, took the train out. It's a long train ride.
And what was it like for you, and how nerve-wracking is it?
It's not, but I'll tell you one funny story. There was a fire a couple of cars down. So I heard someone running, and I heard someone saying, "Fire in the hole." Well, to a soldier, fire in the hole means something's about to go boom. So I was waking up out of a sleep, hearing the running, hearing the fire in the hole, and I was fixing to get off that train real fast.
I'm sure, but thankfully they contained the fire and everybody was okay.
They did. They did.
All right. Well, North Texas Congressman Keith Self of the 3rd Congressional District, thank you so much. You travel safely.
Thank you very much. Take care.
The Texas Attorney General's office says state lawmakers should approve a $3.3 million settlement with 4 whistleblowers who filed a lawsuit against the state. During a budget hearing at the Texas Capitol, Attorney General Ken Paxton didn't answer questions about the proposed settlement agreement with 4 of his former top deputies who filed a whistleblower lawsuit against his office. Instead, Paxton's litigation chief, Chris Hilton, spoke to lawmakers. The 4 men sued Paxton after court records show they went to the FBI more than 2 years ago and made allegations of bribery, among others, against the Attorney General. Paxton then fired them, calling them rogue employees. The Attorney General's office told lawmakers this case is not against Paxton. Joe Knight, an attorney for one of the whistleblowers, Ryan Vassar, said state law requires the state agency to be the defendant.
The only entity we could sue was not Mr. Paxton, but instead the Office of the Attorney General.
As part of the settlement agreement, the state would pay $3.3 million to the 4 men. House Speaker Dade Phelan made headlines across the state last week when he told us the Attorney General would have to ask lawmakers to approve funding to settle the case.
And so do you support it personally, or you don't? Why not?
I don't think it's the proper use of taxpayer dollars.
Paxton didn't answer, but his litigation chief said the Attorney General isn't liable under state law. If lawmakers reject the settlement, Chris Hilton told them that the case would have to proceed to trial. The AG's office said it has already spent nearly $600,000 to defend the case because it has to use lawyers outside the agency. Going to trial, Hilton said, will increase costs to the state and obviously taxpayers in potentially two ways: spending more to defend the case, and if the state loses, the payout to the four men could be quite a bit higher than $3.3 million. Governor Greg Abbott is traveling across the state to sell his legislative priorities this session. He spoke before the Arlington Chamber of Commerce this week and discussed his plan to establish business-related courts. The governor is a former state court judge and state Supreme Court justice and criticized the state of the court system.
If anybody here in this room has been involved in litigation, you're going to know the truth of what I'm about to tell you. Our court system, especially in our large cities, is a travesty of justice, and it is running businesses out of the state of Texas. The good news is there's a fix for it. And it's a model among other states that's used in Delaware. Delaware has separate courts for businesses. And what we're seeking to do is to create specialized courts with the expertise to deal with business litigation. As CEO, you're no longer CEO of that company when you turn the future of that company over to 12 jurors in a jury box. Those jurors are your CEOs, and they're going to decide the fate of the future of your company on that particular issue, which sometimes can be a multi-billion-dollar issue.
The governor also said the state legislature needs to approve a new economic development program that will help the state compete to attract new businesses and jobs to Texas. Also making headlines this week, former President Jimmy Carter has decided to receive hospice care at home instead of additional medical intervention. Some people in North Texas are reflecting how the former president, now 98 years young, helped the Habitat for Humanity program in the cities of Dallas and Fort Worth. Our Olivia Leach has the story.
And then he's busy. He doesn't sit around and chit-chat. He goes to work.
Trinity Habitat for Humanity CEO Gage Yeager remembers Carter's visit in 2014.
But he comes to put his tool belt on, get his gloves on, get his hands dirty, and build the house.
They chose Dallas-Fort Worth as the site for their 2014 Habitat for Humanity International's Jimmy and Rosalind Carter Work Project. Wearing a red bandana and tool belt, he got to work, hammering away alongside hundreds of Habitat for Humanity volunteers in both Fort Worth and Dallas, helping to build 30 homes in the East Oak Cliff neighborhood of Dallas and another 20 homes in Fort Worth's Central Meadowbrook neighborhood.
And when the families start weeping with joy, almost invariably we cry as well. It's one of the happiest times for crying that I've ever experienced.
Gage remembers what it was like to hear President Carter speak.
And the electricity was, it was goosebump stuff. I remember sitting around, looking around, I was like, this is truly amazing.
But his work with Habitat for Humanity spoke even louder than his words.
I am, and all of the Habitat affiliates across the country, we're standing on the shoulders of a giant, right?
Not everyone can say the president helped build their house, but Fort Worth homeowner Jacqueline Wills and her husband Henry can.
They had the houses on this street marked 1 through 10, and ours was number 1, and they called it the Carter House because President Carter himself worked on it.
Jacqueline remembers what it was like to work alongside the president and First Lady.
And it was a humbling experience, but it was such an honor to have him and his wife here working with us. I will never forget that, and I'll be totally indebted to him for the rest of our life.
The second gentleman of the United States, Douglas Emhoff, came to Dallas and addressed thousands of Jewish students about anti-Semitism. The story from Aaron Jones.
It's incidents like the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting in 2018, last year's Colleyville synagogue hostage crisis, and recent anti-Semitic remarks made by celebrities that have Jewish communities across the country on heightened alert.
I want to make sure that everyone can live openly and proudly and without fear. And I know there's a lot of fear out there right now.
As the first Jewish spouse of a U.S. president or vice president, Douglas Emhoff leading a roundtable discussion on combating anti-Semitism at this year's BBYO International Convention in Dallas. It aims to give Jewish teens more meaningful Jewish experiences.
Part of the work that I've been doing is to educate, to explain who Jews are, explain what the Holocaust was, but it's really also to just listen.
Teddy Schneiderman is one of more than 3,000 teens who will be sharing their experiences over the next 5 days.
Anti-Semitism has hit me personally. You know, I've had anti-Semitic things said to me in the past, and it doesn't feel good.
I would guess that probably everybody at this convention has at least been the victim of a remark or something being said to them.
We got to call it out each and every time and not just let it become normalized.
Emhoff says there must be consequences. On behalf of the Biden-Harris administration, he's working on a plan.
Standing up interagency group, all aspects of the federal government. About a week ago, we had one of our first meetings. I think there were 60 people in the room. I came back from Europe. I met with leaders there, made a report. So we're going to incorporate all of that into a plan.
This year's conference theme, Now is Our Time, is meant to encourage teens to focus on democratic engagement.
I think two really important things, one being Holocaust education and two being safe reporting systems.
We're here to inspire, and we are here to make a difference in the world, and that's what BBYO and IC is all about.
Tonight, several of the teens we spoke to say when they go back home, they plan to have conversations in their own communities.
The mayors of Dallas, Fort Worth, and Arlington aren't facing any major challenges during the municipal elections this May. And Mayor Eric Johnson in Dallas isn't facing any challengers on the ballot. We spoke with TCU political science professor Jim Riddlesberger for perspective.
Texas is unusual in the sense that our local elections are nonpartisan. So there is not a political party who feels like they need to field an opponent in this election in Dallas or in Fort Worth or Arlington, all of whom have council manager systems and nonpartisan elections. So there's no facility there for generating a candidate. And the result of that is that if someone wants to run for mayor, they really are on their own. They're on their own to kind of develop their own campaign, develop their own campaign organization, develop their own funding and so forth. And therefore, this is one instance where the nonpartisan elections really serve to kind of discourage a two candidate system like you would normally get if you had partisan elections.
And, all three of these mayors, Mayor Johnson, Mayor Matty Parker in Fort Worth, Jim Ross in Arlington, these are not necessarily open seats. So these are incumbents.
Right.
And so is this a sense of the power of incumbency at work here?
Oh, absolutely. They have name recognition. They already have pre-existing political organizations, obviously. They've been able to develop followings. They've obviously been going to town meetings and town halls and meeting with relevant constituencies across their cities for the entire time that they've been in office. And that gives them a huge advantage over someone who might be trying to run up a startup campaign against them. They've also been in office short enough periods of time that none of them are suffering from what we might call candidate fatigue, where people think, my gosh, they've been in office long enough, it's time to turn the page and move on to somebody new. And in these cases, they're still relatively new in office. So I think all of those things kind of working together have made it where it's very difficult for someone to kind of envision running a successful campaign against them.
And what about the fact that, some people will say, hey, look, that they're doing a good job. So that's the other part of it, where they don't feel there's a rationale to run against them, not just because of money, but because no one's complaining to get them out.
Yeah, and that's again one of the advantages. Now, I mean, one of the disadvantages of a nonpartisan election system is that there is no structure in place to have political opposition because you don't have a Democrat running against a Republican per se. But the real advantage of local politics is most of the problems of local politics have very little to do with partisan elections. By and large, policing is something, while it's obviously very controversial and in some specific ways right now, policing is something that everyone's in favor of. Everyone's in favor of having safe streets and well-lit streets and having the potholes fixed in the roads and making sure that the sewer system runs and the water is flowing. And those are the problems of local governance that allow people who are mayors and city council members to claim accomplishments that everyone, Republicans and Democrats alike, can be behind.
And, most of Texas is the way that you said, as far as municipal governments, city manager, runs the place. The mayor is one of a variety of council members who does they do the policy. But in Houston, they do have a strong mayor form of government, like most other big cities across the country. So it's a little different in Houston.
Absolutely.
Than it is in Dallas.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely the case. And as you know, if you've been watching Dallas politics for a long time, the mayor chortles a little bit under the lack of power and authority that he has as mayor in a council manager system. As cities grow, I think there is pressure to have a little bit more a stronger mayor system, and a little bit more built-in choice, often through partisan elections. So could that happen in Dallas and Fort Worth sometime in the future? I don't think it's out of the question, but right now they are two of the larger cities in the nation that have council manager systems.
All right, TCU political science professor Jim Riddlesberger, we appreciate your perspective on this. Thank you so much.
Okay, you're very welcome. Always good to talk to you, Jack.
That's all for Eye on Politics this week. I'm Jack Fink. Thank you for joining us. You're watching CBS News Texas.